So in this time of political turmoil, rampant hedonism, nihilism, don't know why I'm looking at you, materialism, and rising Islamism, we see you, Andrew Tate, many might look to Christianity as a way of finding some moral guidance. But the institutions purporting to promote the word of the good book have been ideologically captured and corrupted by intersectionality and plain old-fashioned communism. Yay! Let's look today about how the Anglican and Catholic churches are bending the knee and bending over to pride in China, shall we? If you'd like to learn about the early origins of Christianity, you can go over to lotuseaters.com and watch Bo's interview with Radical Liberation, where he talks about the formations of the Catholic Church and the different denominations. Very insightful stuff. We put out content like this all the time on the website, so if you're not signed up, you're really missing out. Let's start with the Pope, shall we? Something that you've also been tracking, and you drew my attention to, the schism, which we'll talk about later on. So the Vatican has done a deal with the Chinese government to ensure that the Vatican has a say in appointing bishops. I can see your face screwed up. You might be thinking, how are the Chinese Communist Party in any way Christian or Catholic?
Yeah.
They're not.
I thought as much.
Which is
I'm
why
not
I hate
surprised.
it. Yeah. So the Vatican on Saturday, when this came out, this was on October 22nd, said that China had renewed a secret and contested agreement with the Vatican on the appointment of Roman Catholic bishops in the communist country. Your first oxymoron. It was the second time the accord, still provisional, was extended for another 2 years since it was first reached in 2018. So they've had a 4-year agreement now. The Vatican-China deal centres on cooperation over the appointment of bishops, giving the Pope the final and decisive say. Only 6 new bishops have been appointed since the deal was struck, which its opponents say proves it is not producing the desired effects. You're not going to convert the communist Chinese to Christianity. Communism is an open repudiation of Christianity. Marx wrote in his early life that he wanted to dispense with God and revolve around himself as his one true son. And then from each according to its ability to each calling to its need is an inversion of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew. So it's an open subversive effort against Christianity.
There's also the fact as well that if you are openly Christian in communist China, that's like painting a target on your back, isn't it? You're not going to willingly put your neck out for the church in a country that's not receptive to those sorts of teachings.
Well, this is also a line in here. The critics also say they point to an increasing restriction on religious freedoms in China for Christians and other minorities. So this is akin to if the Catholic Church formally partnered with the Third Reich for the Kirche part of the Kinderkirche doctrine and says the Third Reich's takeover of the German churches is legitimate in the eyes of the Pope, and the Pope will be hand-selecting party-aligned bishops.
If only that happened.
Yeah. The deal was a bid to ease a long-standing divide across mainland China between an underground flock loyal to the Pope and a state-backed official church. So rather than supporting the people rebelling against the murderous Chinese government, the Pope has thrown his lot in with the Chinese government. How positively Christian of you. For the first time since the 1950s, both sides recognise the Pope as supreme leader of the Catholic Church. Critics, including Cardinal Joseph Zen, aged 90, the former Archbishop of Hong Kong, have denounced it as a sellout to the Chinese Communist authorities based. Zen is currently on trial over the use of a charity fund for its pro-democracy protesters, and critics have accused the Vatican of not doing enough to defend him in public. Zen has, of course, pled not guilty to the Chinese Communist Party's charges.
I find it interesting that they described the Pope as the supreme leader. I mean, the North Koreans, I'm sure, approve of their terminology in use there.
Oh, we'll get to exactly how the Pope himself is a probable communist very shortly. In a July interview with Reuters, the Pope tried to justify this, saying the deal is going slowly, but that the Church needed to take the long view in China, and that an imperfect dialogue was better than no contact at all. Now, I also decided to bring this up because I take my nan to church on Sunday. My granddad's got mobility issues recently, and so I give her some company, and it's nice. And my priest is big, funny Canadian guy, and he did in his homily a pretty explicit shot across the bow, because he decided to mention Maccabees 7, which is the parable of a wife and her 7 sons being persecuted by a tyrannical government. And when they threaten one of them with cutting out his tongue if he doesn't betray his religious convictions, then he sticks out his tongue and hands out his hands, because he said, I'd rather lose these in the material plane than betray God. And so the idea is that Christianity, spiritually, in believing that the material existence is not all there is a bulwark against tyranny, because you have no fear of death, and therefore you have no need to willingly submit. You will die on your feet rather than live on your knees, and that's why it needs to be eradicated. Also, again, Marxism saying religion is the opiate of the masses. It's pretty explicit in that religion is a impediment to the nihilism, which is the precondition to socialism. And he actually called out explicitly, he said, whether it's a tyrant of the past or the Chinese Communist Party of the present, we as Christians must repudiate it. And I went up and thanked him afterwards for his homily because it was very informative and very, not just politically relevant, but principled. I'm not necessarily against politics and religion melding. It's just whether or not you stick to your Christian principles when you wade into the political sphere.
Well, religion and politics are guided by your principles, aren't they? So it's not surprising that there's overlap.
Yeah, and it's nice that we see some more Crusader spirit than the sort of appeasement strategy that the Pope is going on at the moment. But I think it's because he ultimately does believe in it. So Pope has drawn some fire from the National Catholic Register here, because the former governor of Hong Kong has criticised the agreement. Lord Christopher Patten, the last governor of the former British colony of Hong Kong, which should still be under our rule, we should not have given that up in 1997, has joined others in criticising the Vatican for its dealings with the People's Republic of China, the Chinese Communist Party, saying the Vatican is guilty of self-delusion and should make public its recently renewed provisional agreement with Beijing, because we still don't know the intimate details. So he gave an interview with Radio 4, and he said that they imagine they are getting things out of China when China is getting an awful lot of things out of its interlocutor. He said of Cardinal Zen, the man who was detained, he's a great and outspoken advocate for Christian belief and human rights and human dignity, but he said the Vatican has been incredibly lily-livered in what it's said about him. He pointed that at least 2 bishops are in prison, many priests have been driven out of the priesthood because they won't sign a vow of loyalty to the Communist Party and are now working as farmers or working in factories. It's all pretty unclear, pretty muddy about what the Vatican actually got out of the agreement. When asked if he believed the Vatican had a policy of appeasement towards Beijing, he said, certainly if not more. He questioned why the Vatican is being silent about other CCP crimes against not only Christians, but the Muslim Uyghurs in Xinjiang, atrocities that are being condemned by the United Nations. And if the United Nations are more Christian than the Pope, then the Pope has some serious problems, because the United Nations, their free speech and human rights charter literally has the provisions from the Soviet Communist Party in it to say, yeah, well, we should have freedom of speech, except if it's not in the public interest and we can censor Nazis. Sure, yeah. If they can be denounced by the UN, why aren't they denounced by the Catholic Church, he said. I think it's all pretty well, to be blunt, unsavoury. Another former UK government minister, Jacob Rees-Mogg, one of the few half-decent Tories left, has also voiced criticisms. In a recent interview with the London Daily Telegraph, the Catholic parliamentarian said, the thing I'm most worried about is the Catholic Church's relationship with China. I cannot understand why we are allowing the Chinese government to have any say in the appointment of bishops at the same time as Cardinal Zen is being persecuted in Hong Kong. I cannot think what the Holy See is thinking. So, why do we think that Pope Francis is so eager to appease the communist Chinese?
Is he a communist himself?
Shock, horror!
How could I have guessed?
A South American politician is corrupt, and I'm going to call him a politician because he is wielding the church to make international political agreements with tyrants which are against his principles. He is not clearly a man of faith, and I understand it might be heretical for me as a Catholic to say that, but until he demonstrates otherwise, I think he's a satanistic subverter. Go to hell. So I understand this might be a very strange source to cite, but this was a biopic recently created with Anthony Hopkins in, and not the first time Anthony Hopkins has played a villain. And in The Two Popes, a recent feature film produced by Netflix, again, bastion of subversion, Father Jorge Bergoglio, I hope I've got that right, but I don't think I have.
Bergoglio?
Something like that, is sent into the wilderness where he wanders alone in the Argentine mountains for 2 years. I'm sure he met all sorts of unsavory characters there, if it's Argentina. During an intense process of spiritual rebirth, crucial to his transformation into Pope Francis, he turns to radical books of the very kind he had cleared out in the Jesuit order in the late 1970s, during the military dictatorship in Argentina. In one scene, the camera pauses briefly on the cover of Volume 1, 1968's Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire, the educator whose legacy the current Brazilian president, Jair Bolsonaro, until very recently, of course, spent the past year attacking. Now, do we know who Paulo Freire is?
So he's not that American chef. I know that
that's
much.
Guy Fieri.
Of course.
Yes. He puts out things that don't taste quite as well, I will say. We'll go on to Paulo Freire's legacy in a minute. Now, as I said, that might be seen a bit of a tenuous source, but if we look into Pope Francis's career history and time as the Pope, we will actually see some things that he's done to establish further connections with the Freirean family, and we'll talk about what Freire's legacy that Bolsonaro was so evilly attacking a little while later. So, finally, it's worth underscoring that the thrust of Pope Francis's ministry is one that seeks a poor church that possesses a heart for the poor, which is clearly making its mark on his pontificate. It is therefore no great coincidence that only a few months after he shouldered the papacy, Pope Francis invited Gustavo Gutierrez to Rome, holding private confessions and celebrating Mass. Indeed, in the 266th pontiff, Gutierrez sees a church with a change in atmosphere. Now, that change is towards communism, most likely, because that change in atmosphere caught the attention of Anna Maria Araujo Freire, the widow of Paolo Freire. Nita requested a visit with Pope Francis and he graciously obliged, receiving her at the Vatican in April 2015. Discussing Freire's work, which Francis has read, Nita not only sees Freire's writings as more relevant today than they were 20 years ago, but also saw in Pope Francis one who is creating a new face of the church, that he has the plight of the poor in the forefront of his ministry. So, I don't know if you're familiar with anything for Freire, but James Lindsay has been doing a great work on critical education pedagogy. This is the roots of what is going on in schools at the moment. It's not just about drag, it's not just about critical race theory, it's the overarching theory that you can take a bunch of grievance groups, put them to the forefront, make them from the marginal into the mainstream, and raise critical consciousness in students to incite socialist revolution. And this all came from Paulo Freire. So he wanted to abolish distinctions between parent and, teacher and student, because the parents wouldn't be involved, of course. And in the Marxist dialectic, he wanted to have the students' relative ignorance to societal conditioning repeal the prejudices of the teacher, and the teacher, in turn, can fill the kids' heads with all sorts of socialist revolutionary nonsense. It's an Ouroboros of Marxism in the education system. That is who Paulo Freire was. That is his legacy. Pope Francis is a student of his. Very disturbing stuff. I've also heard unconfirmed reports that Klaus Schwab was also very well connected with Paulo Freire, and it's no shock that the Pope is a contributor to the World Economic Forum as well, so great stuff. So, as you pointed out to me, because of all this sort of stuff, because people are getting very discontented, such as myself, because you can't look to the institution of the Catholic Church for guidance, there's an internal schism going on. Now, the Pope was on a flight back, and he was being interviewed, and he said, speaking on board the papal plane on his return trip from Madagascar, Mauritius, and Mozambique, the Pope said that he had been unfairly labelled a communist. Are you for real? You host communists, you read communist literature, you're saying you want to terraform the face of the church, and you're saying, but I'm not a communist, senor. Go to hell. By his critics, with the most vocal voice being conservative Catholics in the United States. Oh, of course, the religious right. Woo. Yeah, Jack Posobiec is single-handedly taking down the Catholic Church, is he? In his strongest remarks yet on the risk of a schism, he said that there have been many doctrinal splits during the 2,000-year history of the Church, although he prayed there would not be another. I am not afraid of schisms. I pray there will be none, because what is at stake is people's spiritual health, he told the journalist aboard the plane. The Pope's impassioned defense of migrants and refugees, his opposition to Donald Trump's wall on the US-Mexico border, because God forbid we stop coyotes raping young girls, his sympathy towards homosexuals, and his openness to remarried divorcees being allowed to take communion have earned him the ire of conservatives, particularly in the US. The only thing he hasn't done is legitimised abortion because he refused Nancy Pelosi communion. That's the only thing that he's done that's okay. The only thing I do feel sorry for him as well is obviously putting up the stench of Joe Biden crapping his pants in front of him, but I think that's possibly deserved for being a disgusting communist.
Go
for it, please.
Isn't there also something going on in Germany again? A sort of Martin Luther II electric boogaloo?
Unfortunately, we'll get onto that in a moment, but that's not something that fills me with faith, because it's going, much like Just Stop Oil are the foot soldiers of what the elite have already determined for climate change, the German schism are the foot soldiers for the progressivizing of the Catholic Church.
As in, he's not progressive enough.
No. Echoing remarks that he's made throughout his papacy, he condemned populism and xenophobia, likening the populist politicians to Adolf Hitler. So if you don't agree with me, you're literally Hitler. The Pope! Sometimes, in some places, I hear speeches given that sound similar to those made by Hitler in 1934. It's as if they want to return to the past in Europe. Xenophobia is a human disease like measles, he said. So, speaking of the Germans, let's go to what Germany want. They want to accelerate the contradictions, because they're also communists. Brilliant. I say to German Catholics, Germany has a great Protestant church, but I don't want another one, because it won't be good, the Pope said. Francis was responding to a question as to what Germany's Catholic Church should do in the face of decreasing membership. Record numbers of Germans have left their congregations in recent years, with church membership dropping below 50% for the first time in 2021. Can you guess why?
Is it because of the Pope?
No, it's because 58% of them want the Catholic Church to recognise abortion as a human right.
Oh.
So you're not Catholics, you're murderous communists. Go to hell, you disgusting subverters. And I understand lots of our audience maybe have followed Carl since the emerging 2014, not only Gamergate, but sort of new atheist period of YouTube, and don't necessarily find yourself agreeing with spiritual prescription, so this might be completely over your head. Let's just say that much like Gamergate was being entered by disgusting feminists to pollute what your hobby stood for, that you took a lot from it, this is entirely against Christian doctrine, and so this just should not be here. As a classification error, even if you don't agree with it, it shouldn't be here. It's like someone selling bacon butties in a synagogue. It makes absolutely no sense. So is there any alternative? Well, as we see with our good friend Calvin Robinson, who has been complaining about it on the show and on Twitter, and battling off Tom Harwood's advocacy of sin constantly, 5 more Anglican bishops have backed same-sex marriages in the church. First of all, look at this thumbnail image.
Oh, dear.
A female priest ordaining a lesbian wedding, and they're all wearing masks. Of course it's published in The Guardian. I hate it. 5 more Anglican bishops have publicly backed a call for the Church of England to lift its ban on same-sex marriage, in a sign that momentum may be building for historic change. The bishops of Worcester and Dudley have all written to clergy in their area saying the time has come for the church to celebrate and honour same-sex relations. Now, as a former theatre kid, I don't really have a problem with gay people at all. Like, do what you want, man. As long as you like men and women and don't like kids, all fantastic. But as a classification error, again, marriage is between a man and a woman because the institution of marriage is not for you two to express your love, as Joe Rogan belabored to Matt Walsh recently. It's because you are signing an official contract that there is something beyond you when a child is involved, and that you don't give that up because it's better for you to be the kind of people that warrant being parents and staying together to give the best thing for the child. And last I checked, even though the trans activists are trying to tell me otherwise, when you bump uglies as a same-sex attracted couple, you don't produce any babies. So definitionally, marriage is redundant. Civil partnerships, sure, and I'm sure that my gay mates, I'll be invited to them and probably asked to do a best man speech for one of my best mates. But definitionally, gay marriage doesn't make any sense. So the church ordaining this is actually against scripture. It's blasphemous. Sorry. The bishops of Reading, Buckingham and Dorchester have all tweeted their endorsement of an essay published on Friday by Stephen Croft, the Bishop of Oxford, arguing that the Church of England should end its refusal to allow same-sex couples to marry in church. Andrea Williams, the chief executive of Christian Concern, has pushed back on this, saying, while society is reeling from the damage caused by the sexual revolution-based, sexual license-based, divorce-based, pornography-based, abuse and gender ideology, which will cause untold harm. Fantastic. Any move by the church to revise the doctrine of marriage will cause an open rupture in the Anglican communion, not only in the UK, but all over the world. So, set an example according to scripture, which would be pretty normative. So I just wanted to finish on this, which is, oh, but what's the harm in just letting the same people express the same love over and over again? And again, I don't think you have to be a Christian to object to Dave Rubin's plans for his family. I understand Jordan Peterson is trying to be very compassionate here, but this sounds awful dystopian. Let's take a look.
Children who are breastfed do better.
Yep.
I believe that 1 year of breastfeeding is equivalent to, I think breastfed kids have a 5-point IQ advantage. And 1 point IQ is worth 1 year of education.
I have
basically.
2 freezers in my garage, 2 industrial freezers full of breast milk.
Right,
That's
right.
David has done all the research on this.
Right. So another complication, but okay. And so, but roughly speaking, women tend to do the nurturing thing more and men do the encouraging thing more. So now the question is, how do you mediate? How do you manage to fulfill both those roles in the absence of a heterosexual arrangement?
Now,
Yes.
you know David pretty well, and we've been out to dinner with Tammy many times.
Yeah.
And you know him. He is incredibly warm and nurturing and loving and deeply cares about all those things. And I'm telling you, he is reading about skin-to-skin contact every day and all of the breast milk stuff and everything. And I know he will have a huge percentage of the stuff that a mother would bring. But I also know it's not all of it. And we thought we could take some of my sister's eggs, and she's a mother now. She's actually pregnant with her third. But that we could get her eggs, and then we would take David's sperm, and then we would have 2 children from that. After a long time of talking, about a year debating that back and forth and going through all that, there were a lot of ethical and moral issues. And my sister then would be the biological mother of my children. I mean, there were all sorts of things that we were about to traverse.
Right, and that's all uncharted territory, right?
The average person who was protesting at Stonewall, if you would have said to them, the average person that was 35 years old that was at a bar at Stonewall, I want to be able to go to a bar that has windows maybe that aren't blocked out, that isn't underground, and all of these things, and be in a relationship that I don't have to hide or whatever. Actually, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, this is going to be about sending your kid to school where they're going to privately discuss sex with teachers. They would
As a
never
prodrome
believe
to
it.
hormonal transformation and surgery.
That I think had the world not shifted to be a little bit kinder, had I not maybe been on tour with you and come to some of these realizations or found someone in the world that I wanted to put their needs above my own, that I could have been left to a life that would have been sort of purely narcissistic.
Look, I'm very glad Dave has met someone that he really gets on with. However, this was the argument that conservative Christians were accused of making slippery slope and being facetious way back when they were trying to redefine marriage in saying, well, you're going to atomize the nuclear family. And now we've got a fairly dystopian setting where his husband, who is gay, is impregnating via IVF his sister, and they've got industrial freezers full of other women's breast milk. That's really, 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 really weird.
It is a bit strange.
It's very odd.
I appreciate that he's doing his best to simulate a traditional family.
But it's not the best for the kid. It's not the best for the kid. Sorry. You are voluntarily depriving a child of his mother. So, I might suggest to the church, return to a little bit of tradition, stop getting into bed with communists or otherwise, and maybe apply some normal ethical sexual standards because society is sorely in need with them.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the Contemplation series that Josh does, this one on the psychology and morality of pornography. If you'd like to find out what else we're putting out, you can follow us on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.